Good evening, good evening, good evening. Let me welcome you to this evening's presentation of Mango Tree Dialogues, forum in which we discuss the very important issues of the day. And we'd like to, I'd like to say thanks for joining me, as I know there are many other things that you could be doing. And if you have missed the, being able to be here, then you can still pick us up by going to the channel, Mango Tree Dialogues. It's very relaxing under the mango tree. And I'd like to thank you for being my company for the better part of an hour. All right. Probably not so much of a light moment, but just to remind you that we are entering into the winter season. We are going into that part of the year where there tends to be a spike in some of these viruses, that are very prevalent at this time, the flu virus to be certain. And of course, there is the ever-present COVID-19 virus, which tends to be very prevalent in the population at this time of the year. So what I want to encourage you to do, those of you who can, you must, get your shots. And there are other vaccines that are available for other purposes as well that you can get if you go to the pharmacies. And I'm talking here in the United States specifically, that you can get your flu shot and your COVID shot all at the same time. So just present yourself and just to keep yourself safe. It is true that COVID does not pose the problem it did when it just came into our lives, but it still can do a lot of damage, especially to populations that are very vulnerable. And, those who have long-standing sicknesses, and their immune systems are not strong enough. They've gone through a cancer episode, or they've gone through other illnesses that have debilitated their bodies to the point that their immune systems are not strong. Those people especially need to really get the vaccine to boost their system so that when the virus hits, they will not have a very horrible episode from it. Because it is affecting people and it is causing deaths in some instances, but not as bad, but just be careful. So I thought that I would want to share that with you as we get on with the program this evening. All right, what are the things that are on my mind? I want to go to Jamaica and to talk about a particular matter that has been occupying the minds of Jamaicans. I was going to say many Jamaicans, but I have no statistic to that because I don't know how many Jamaicans are tuned in to the FINSAC dilemma that the country has faced and that is still facing in many respects, although, it is quite muted. There are many people talking about it now, but just the last week or so, the Minister of Finance, Dr. Nigel Clark, he presented what had been in consideration for a good while, what he is calling a FinSac archive, an archive of the of the meltdown of the financial sector in 1997. And it is there. If you go to the ministry's website, it is there, and it is in other fora where you can read it and see, just go there and look at what is being presented. I will have more to say about it shortly. But I just want us to have a kind of background, a very quick background to what we're talking about here. Because the FINSAC dilemma, as I'm calling it, has been one of the most profound economic catastrophes in Jamaica. In 1997, a bomb went off in the economy, specifically in the financial sector of the economy. Many banks buckled. Many financial institutions, insurance companies came under severe stress. Because what was happening in the economy is that there was a load of debt that had been accumulated both by the private sector, the public sector, and the private sector, but especially so the private sector. And I'm just going to give you just a quick synopsis of what was at play. There are many institutions, financial institutions, that were over-leveraged. They lent money and were not able to collect on the debts. Needless to say, people found it very difficult to pay back these debts because they were at very high interest rates. There was a time I can recall, because I lived through that dilemma. And there was a time I can recall when interest rates on overdrafts, for example, went over 100%. Loans were being lent by financial institutions at over 50%. Certificates of deposit were enjoying interest rates of well over 60% in some institutions. And so there was, and what was happening too, I will recall that whenever the interest rates were maturing and they were pumped back into the economy and then put pressure with the amount of money circulating in the economy, there was one mantra that you heard constantly from the Minister of Finance at that time, Dr. Omar Davis. We have to mop up liquidity. So there was a mopping up of liquidity. You're pushing money out into the system because of this high interest rate. And at the same time, you have to be mopping it up so that it does not put unnecessary strain on the monetary situation in the country. You know, friends, I heard people talking about they didn't have to produce anything. If they had money, if they had $20 million or $10 million that they could put in an investment, who was going to take that chance and build a factory or try to manufacture a good that they could sell to people, when they could just take that $10 million and put it in a banking institution and get over 40% interest rate on it? So that is the kind of thing that was happening. And the banks were very laxed in the way in which they lent money to the public. There was a whole lot of things happening because people were being encouraged to produce and to encouraged to come and get these loans and all that sort of thing. And so there was a growth, and a good thing, you know, in the sense that there was a growth in the what you call the entrepreneurial class, the black middle class. Many members of the black middle class began to see themselves now as, you know, captains of industry, that they could now have a chance to make a life for themselves. And so many people, should I say, took the bait and borrowed excessively high money at excessively high interest rates. And the time came that for these to be paid back, and they just could not pay it back. You know, high interest rates at any given time in any economy is a thief of the future. of any enterprise. And it is a thief of the future of any individual who happens to find himself in that bind, where you are paying a high interest rate on monies that you have borrowed, and you do not see any meaningful return on the money that you borrowed, because you ended up, instead of producing something that could benefit you and benefit others, you had to be using money to be paying back these monies that were demanded by these high interest rates. So in a nutshell, as we say, story came up the bump. And the whole sector, that's when the bomb went off. And the entire financial sector collapsed under the weight and burden of excessive debt. That was the fact. I know the politicians on both sides of the political spectrum, they will spin it in the way that they want to spin it. And they have spun it. And I am listening to the comments after the archive was announced. And both sides are at it now, blaming each other as to what happened. Yes, it happened under the watch of the P.J. Patterson administration. He was prime minister. And Omar Davis, as I mentioned earlier, was the Minister of Finance. And so they have to take a great deal of the blame for what went on. But it cannot be enough just to say that because of their perceived mismanagement of the economy, that they alone must bear the responsibility for it. Because when you are borrowing money, and this is for individuals as well as companies, when you're borrowing money, you have to be very judicious in the way you borrow. And if you know that you're not going to be able to repay a loan, by whatever means you are going to be able to do it, then you should think very hard before taking that burden onto yourself, because at any time, debt is a burden. Even if it is interest-free, it is a burden because you have a responsibility to pay it back. And when you're demanded, when there's a demand on you to pay it, you better be able to be in a position to deal with it. But some people will argue, of course, we wanted to pay back the debt, but we just found out that the interest rate kept rising, and that really happened to a lot of people. You borrowed $10 million, and before you know it, you owed 15, or you have paid back 5 million, and you still owe 15 because the interest rates just kept moving. You borrowed at 20%, and before you know it, you are at 25 and all the way up to 40%. You never bargained for that because the interest rates were just moving targets. So, you can understand that even judicious people who borrowed, got caught. But, the burden is always on the borrower to discharge his or her debt. So everybody got in on the act, as it were. The whole, especially the entrepreneurial middle class, as I mentioned. Many people are saying that it is black man's time now to take control of the Jamaican economy and to take control of the commanding heights of the economy and to make a life for themselves. And many institutions just sprung up, financial institutions just sprung up, lending money, some like confetti, not not doing the due diligence in checking out the viability of a particular proposal that comes from somebody. For example, people with properties, the banks did not go there and check to make sure that the information that was being told to them was correct. They just accepted it and just lent money. Very few went out there and did the due diligence to say that the property that was being offered as collateral really existed. Yeah, I lived through the period, so I know what I'm talking about. Can give you anecdotes of these things. And so the sad thing then is that everything just boom. And the country was put in a very terrible position. You imagine? Because to correct the problem, the government at the time came up with this idea of FINSAC. And FINSAC is really an acronym which means Financial Sector Adjustment Company. They put together this government body as a way of dealing with the crisis. But one thing you know is that the crisis just kept spiraling and spiraling. And people's properties were compromised and people began to lose their properties. And eventually some people lost their lives because under the weight and the pressure of having to deal with the situation, some died from heart failure. There was a couple that died from suicide. And others developed all kinds of sicknesses because of the stress that was induced by the problems they were going through with the financial institution, and especially when FINSAC was formed. Eventually, to cut a long story short, the debts were bundled together and sold out to an American entrepreneur. And people say that what happened is that they were sold for pennies to the dollar. And so there was a wipeout. And there is all kinds of charge about, what happened in the political realm of politicians benefiting from it, either getting an ease on their indebtedness and getting back their properties, or when the properties were being sold, getting properties at very concessional, below concessional rates. You hear all kinds of stories. But the bottom line is that not only was the country's back to the wall, but the backs of many citizens were to the wall. As a matter of fact, the lives of many citizens were under duress. FINSAC cost the government, or the fallout of the financial sector cost the government over 120 billion Jamaican dollars. That was about 40% of the country's GDP. Think about that. And sent the debt ratio to GDP to close to 140%. Can you imagine that we have now climbed down to the point that perhaps in the next fiscal year, we could be looking at about 65 to 70%. The international consideration, I understand, is about 60% to give a level of stability. If you are above 65 going up, then you need to watch where you are. So we have climbed down quite a bit from that, but then that's another story. And so the government, when it lost power to the Jamaica Labour Party under Bruce Golding, and now the new finance minister, Mr. Audley Shaw, they put together a commission, the FINSAC Commission of Inquiry, to look into what happened. And that was the right thing to do. Because how could something like this have happened? And nobody inquired about what really went down so that we can have something in our hands to look back on and say, hey, this should never again happen. How are the debtors going to be treated, and those who were maltreated in the whole process of losing their properties? How are they going to be compensated at all? At the very least, the country needed to know by inquiry by the government, which is the body that is best able to do that sort of thing, to know the contours of the problems that we faced and what caused these problems. Again, as I said, that we don't go back and repeat it in the future. So many witnesses were called, people who lost property were called. They came and they gave their story. It was quite a boondoggle as it went on. But again, to cut a long story short, the people who started the commission in the first instance, after a while, it went on and it dissipated. And then a new set of people were put in. And they too came up against a whole lot of, should I use the word obstructions? But let me just say impediments, for lack of a better word. And so there was no final report that was presented to the people of Jamaica. Up to now, we have not seen any final report of what happened in the greatest financial meltdown that the country has suffered. We do not have a formal report anywhere to tell us what went down. I hear talk about some interim report or some draft of a report that was done by Mr. Henderson Donor, who was asked to prepare some report, I guess. But we have not officially seen any report. Only to hear the minister now. It has come back again because it didn't go away. I remember when Minister Shaw then was introducing the commission to the country and what was going to be done, and the kind of eloquence and Mr. Shaw is capable of in saying that we're going to have to right this wrong and all this sort of thing. And then for a number of years after that, with this new body that was asked to look into it and not getting anywhere, the thing just dissipated, and it fell now to another PNP, JLP administration, now under Mr. Honis, under now Dr. Clark as the minister, to deal with it. And people have been asking. I know that I have been writing about this a number of times in my Jamaica Observer column, asking questions. Where is the report? And all that, the last financial debate, when we had the last budget debate, the minister said that they were going to create an archive of what happened so that the people of Jamaica could go and read for themselves what went down. Well, I wonder how many Jamaicans are going to be able to access that report, Mr. Minister. And even if they do, how many Jamaicans are going to be able to wade through? I've had a quick glance at the archive, but there are so many things that have been redacted, so many things for privacy purposes, understandably, yes. But so many things that the ordinary Jamaican will not understand, and if you're digitally challenged. you're going to have a problem accessing the report. So in a way, it is good that you created an archive so that people can have something to refer to. But in a way, the archive itself has come as a kind of blanket over the minds of people in terms of real knowledge and transparency to the general populace. I would have preferred to see a report written up with recommendations. But to just create an archive of stories and all this sort of thing and think that that satisfies a problem, to me, is a very serious cop-out. But you see, the government wants it to go away. The minister didn't want to leave it. He's leaving at the end of the month, and he didn't want to leave it hanging. He wanted to know that it was, as promised, something that was fulfilled. But it does not really get to the real nitty-gritty, let me say, of what ought to be proposed to the Jamaican people. And the many people who lost and are still suffering, who have not gotten at all any just compensation for what they went through. What about them? Is this the end of it? An archive? That's the end of it? Somehow they're not more than a feeling. It's more than a feeling that there is something unfinished in just presenting an archive. But are they going to go back to it? No. All that you will hear from here on is that, especially in this charged political atmosphere that is going to come starting January, it started already, but in vogue in the first quarter of next year, as the elections become more charged, because we have to have elections by the general elections by September of next year. Already both sides are trading barbs at each other. And so all that you're going to get is a whole lot of hot air, a whole lot of, noise from both sides, accusing each other and saying who's, under whose watch what happened and what should never happen again. I would have preferred to see something more tangible than that, than a mere archive. And I think that, in a way, the minister meant good in wanting to put something like that out there. But it is still an unfinished business, certainly in the minds of the victims who believe that they have been treated badly in this matter. So we will see what happens. But my strong feeling is the government is not going to return to it to produce any kind of a report along the line that I'm talking about, and that is hoped for by many who have suffered under this debacle. I don't see them going back to it. And the archive for them is a necessary tombstone for FINSAC. All right, so I leave it at that. And but we're in very interesting times, and we'll see how that one plays out on the political stumps. All right, let me get to the US and again to the elections, the US presidential elections. And what I want to do at this point is we know that the elections are in full gear. As a matter of fact, just a few days, 12 days or so before the elections happen. As a matter of fact, a lot of people throughout the country have already voted. Over uh, the last statistics I read today, over 20 odd million people have voted throughout the country. And there's a massive turnout of people. I believe that this time around, this election, US presidential election year, is going to top all voting years from we have been tabulating these elections. This year will rise to the very top of the number of people who would have participated in voting. There tends to be a reasonable response to voting patterns by the US population. But I think that this year is going to be the cream of the crop where that is concerned. But, there's something that has been on my mind with regard to the Hispanic community in this country. The Hispanic community has grown a great deal. And the Pew Research, which is one of the more reliable polling and research organizations in the United States, the Pew, P-E-W organization. They did a study, and their latest study in 2021 to 2022, they have it that there are over 63 million Hispanics in the US. And of course, Hispanics are the folks from Latin America who have come here from Mexico, Argentina, Venezuela, Guatemala, all of those countries. 63 million. And of this number, over 80% of them are citizens, which means as citizens, they can vote. This is one of the concerns that the Trump campaign has had about illegals coming here and voting, and they tend to look at Hispanics in a general way to say that they're illegals, when he's not cursing them and calling them all kinds of names about them coming to poison the blood of America or vermins or some other unsavory characterizations. He's accusing them of vote tampering and voting illegally in the election. So, but they're a big population. So if you have close to 63 million that are in the population, that is about 19% of the population, almost 20% of the US population. And it has risen since that time. So you could be looking at close to probably 25% of the population that is Hispanic. And if, say, 70% of that is those are citizens, they can vote, you can see the extent to which they can influence the election. And this year especially, analysts are looking at it and realizing, and the two campaigns are looking at it and realizing that they are a potential force that can make the difference between who wins in November. The general narrative is that the Hispanics favor the Democrats. And voting patterns have established that over the years, they tend to vote for the Democratic Party. But in this election, there has been a noticeable shift of Hispanics to the Trump campaign, and especially among men wanting to vote for Trump. One of the things that they talk about is, and that was so, especially so in the last elections, the last presidential elections, they talked about the socialism, that the Democrats are socialists. And you see, many of these people, Hispanics who are here, they have come out of countries that have had brushes with socialism. You think of Cuba, for example, and other countries in Latin America that have gone socialist, Venezuela, and at one point Chile under Salvador Allende, and to an extent Argentina under the Peron, wife and husband. And so the thinking is that to them, socialism is a bad word, even though they come to the United States and the policies that they love, where the government hands out, certain things, social benefits. They don't see these things as socialist. But anyway, I don't want to go down that line too far. But I just want to say that this has been one of their bugbears about the socialism. And the word that I would want to say to the Hispanic community, and incidentally, I'm preparing a video specifically to address this, which should be done by over this weekend, to talk directly to the Hispanic community in terms of their support for Trump. And where I believe that their support is generally misguided, because they are forgetting some very important things about their history, the history of Latin America, and the history especially between the 1970s and the 1980s, the rule of the dictatorships in Latin America. Many fled Cuba because of the Castros. They fled communism. They fled dictatorship. And they came to America. Then there are the Argentinians who fled Argentina to here, especially in the between 1976 and 1983, when there was a military dictatorship in Argentina. And over 10,000 to 30,000 people were killed. There were many who just disappeared. They were arrested by the death squads of the Argentinian military that was in charge of the government. And many just disappeared. They called them Las Desaparecidos. Pardon my Spanish. The disappeareds. Because they were taken from their homes and they never returned. Hundreds upon hundreds of people who never returned to their families. And then you have Pinochet in Chile. And then you have, and what happened to that country under him. Then you had Chavez, who was a benign, to many poor people in Venezuela, a benign dictator, so to speak. But now you have Maduro, who succeeded him, who has pushed dictatorship to another level, to the extent that even in the last election, it was seen that he stole the election against the popular will of the people. So the point I'm making, friends, is this, that when Hispanics are in this country and they turn to somebody like Donald Trump, who is offering them, or who they think can offer them, a new heaven and a new earth, they need to think again. Because the same kind of dictatorship that many of them fled from in Latin America to come here to find better pastures in which to graze is the same kind of dictatorship, or worse, that Trump is promising. And what is flabbergasting to me is the extent to which they're failing to see this. That they think that their lives can be better if there is subscription of loyalty to one strong man. The same kind of strong men that ruled Latin America, right across the whole length and breadth of Latin America, in Ecuador, in Paraguay, all of these places. There was a craze of right-wing dictatorships right across the continent. And many suffered. And to think that now somebody who is espousing the same kind of philosophy is going to be your grandfather who helps you out. Come on. It's too late now, I think, perhaps for the Harris campaign to come up with an effective counter to this. She does have a lot of time, and there are so many issues coming at her, poor lady. Just swamped with all kinds of stuff. And I don't know what the leadership of the Hispanic community is really looking at. I've heard some of them speaking in support of Trump, that Trump will provide them a better economic livelihood than they have had. But they haven't heard perhaps about Project 2025. They haven't heard of how Trump is planning to govern, the kind of chaos that is going to ensue, that is going to make their lives harder. They haven't heard perhaps about his desire to detain illegals in this country, of which most of them, I would argue, are Hispanics. Most of them. And if he's going to send back 11 to 12 million people, he's going to go all through the country and round them up and send them back. You think you're not going to be, you think Hispanics are not going to be caught up in that dragnet? And not just those who are here illegally, but those who are here legally, because they'll find some way. Those who are naturalized citizens, they'll find some way to denaturalize you, as has been suggested by one of Trump's key persons, that there is going to be denaturalization on steroids. And you think you're not going to be exposed to that when you hear that knock on the door? Think again. Those who have not voted yet, think again. Think hard. One thing I can be certain of is that your lives are not going to be any better under that kind of system that I hear Trump wanting to introduce. It really puzzles the mind that people who have tasted of dictatorship to the extent that they have in Latin America could think that there is any kind of possibility for their lives and their children's lives by supporting a wannabe dictator, as Trump wants to be. So I'm going to be working on the video. It's going to be a brief video, just a message to the Hispanic community, and hopefully to get it disseminated so we can at least add something to distill it a little bit more for people to understand that, hey, but be careful what you're looking at, and be careful about what you're choosing. If you voted already, as I said, you can't be helped if you voted for Trump. As far as I'm concerned, you would have thrown away that vote. If it is your own personal peace and that of your family you voted for, you'd have dashed it away. But if you have not yet voted, there might be a chance for a better life for you and your family. All right, so I'm gonna leave it there and I'll let the video later on speak for itself. All right, so that brings us then to the end of our program this evening. Next week when we come, we're gonna have a more fulsome discussion on the elections because that will be our last program before the elections in November. And so we want to talk, my panel and I, hopefully to address in a more fulsome way where we are and where we're going. You know, a lot of people have voted, but there are millions more who have not voted. There are millions more who are going to be voting on the day off. And that's usually the case. So there are still many people out there that ought to be convinced of the perils that this country faces under another Trump presidency. So let me thank you for joining me under the mango tree this evening. And let me wish for you and your family a very, very good night. And that whatever you do, well, good. Bye-bye.